Well, I have a question for all of us today. When you were a child, when you were young, did you have a favorite tree? Did you have perhaps a favorite kind of tree? Well, we're going to combine the magic of trees, poetry, and each of our own well being today, which means you are listening to Poetry, Gossip, and the Pursuit of Pleasure with Dale Byron. That's me. And this is a podcast where we look at creative ways to hitch up poetry to our everyday lives, our everyday joys, challenges, and everything in between. And I like to say this past week, I was thinking we're trying to find little pockets of joy, sanity, and connectedness in the poetry and in the conversations we have. So that brings me to this week's episode, which is entitled Reimagining the Magic of Trees. And of course, doing so with poetry and stories. Reimagining the magic of trees. Now, I got to say, when I was a kid, to answer my own question, I actually did have a love affair with trees. I loved dogwoods. I loved pines. I loved oaks. I loved gumball trees. I loved tulip trees and magnolias. And my dad planted an apple tree the day I was born. So I had my own tree right in the front yard. But most of all, in addition to the apple tree, there was this incredibly huge, I mean, it was large, but when you're 4 or 5 years old or so, trees look even more magnificent and majestic. And there was this tree that particularly on summer mornings, when I would go out and I would literally dance around that oak tree, and it was a way I started my day. And I just absolutely loved it. And so I have thought over the years that there is an incredible kind of magic in trees. And so today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to honor the tree. I wanted to really kind of look at trees as mentors to each of us, trees as a wise relative that we can look to not only help us learn, but help us to increase our own well-being. And so one of the things I think that we humans on this subject that we love to compare ourselves to is our trees. And, some of the notes I made is that their beauty, their strength, their size, their support, their rootedness, the way their heavenly reach and their gaze. And so in today's episode, we will honor the best of what it means to be a human and to be a tree. And it turns out that if we allow trees, as I've already mentioned, to become our mentors, that we will naturally be more wise, I think, and more beautiful creatures ourselves. When we remember, I like to use that word in a literal sense, when we remember to put ourselves together in a certain way. And in this episode today, we're going to be talking about using the magic of trees to remember ourselves. So that brings me to our first piece, which is a quote, a kind of a prose poem from Nikita Gill, who is a British Indian poet, playwright, and writer. And she wrote a short little piece called You Have Become a Forest. And I wanted us to start right there. She says it like this. One day, one day when you wake up, you will find that you have become a forest. You have grown roots and found strength in them that no one thought you had. You have become stronger and more beautiful, full of life-giving qualities. You have learned to take all the negativity around you and turn it into oxygen for easy breathing. A host of wild creatures live inside you, and you call them stories. A variety of beautiful birds rest inside your mind, and you call them memories. You have become an incredible self sustaining thing of epic proportions. And you should be so proud of yourself, of how far you have come, of how far you have come from the seeds of who you used to be. And you should be so proud of yourself, of how far you have come from the seeds of who you used to be. That's Nikita Gill. You have become a forest, is the title of that piece. So here we are. We're already off on this reimagining the magic of trees journey, of finding or reconnecting with the love that we had perhaps as young children with trees or with a particular tree. And if not, finding that magic perhaps as well. So let's keep moving on with another poem, another poetic piece, this time by the poet Scott O'Brien. And I don't know a lot of details about Scott O'Brien. I do know that I have loved this poem for a number of years and have used it on a number of occasions. It's called Be Like a Tree. Be like a tree. And the first line is just that. Be like a tree. Be like a tree. Just be. Storms will come, the stars and the sun, the seasons will pass through while you host your nest of young birds. Turn the cold of fall mornings into gold greetings, falling jewels. Feel your sap tending down. Allow it to descend. It knows to gather in winter your roots to rebuild. Stand barren and bare through the dark cold of winter, while underground your spark is kept alive. Feel, feel the quiet glow of spring's first melt. Rose cast through the orchard, warmth welcoming tiny buds from your winter armored brown. I love that expression. I love that phrase. I love that image. Feel the quiet glow of spring's first melt. Rose cast through the orchard, warmth welcoming tiny buds from your winter armored brown. Your winter armored brown. Nothing to do, the poem goes on. Nothing to do through the heat of summer, nothing to do through the heat of summer, but shade your small estate. Simply allow your fruit forth and share and share. Hold your nest, hold your nest, hold your ground. Just be a tree. Nothing to do through the heat of summer. Can you just feel that? Especially when you were young, a child. I don't know about you, but summers lasted forever. And that the warmth, I grew up in the Southeast, and of course we had humidity, but because that's all I knew, it was okay back then. And to be able, as I said, to dance around that oak tree in the morning, to start the day that way, which it was just, where did that come from? I don't know. It was just organically spontaneous, I suppose. I don't think I knew anybody that danced around trees, but I did. So it says nothing to do through the heat of summer, but shade your small estate. Simply allow your fruit forth and share and share. Hold your nest, hold your ground. Just be a tree. Mmm, so delicious. I found a quote that seemed appropriate for this episode by a Palestinian writer named Mahmoud Darwich, and contemporary, lived from 1941 to 2008. He said it like this. He said, if the olive trees knew, if the olive trees knew the hands that planted them, their oil would become tears. If the olive trees knew the hands that planted them, their oil would become tears. Recently, my wife and I were in Spain for a trip that I feel such deep gratitude for the opportunity to be in that country and to spend some time there. And the olive trees that we saw, the just the amazing um, forest of our olive trees, um, was just breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. Also, I wanted to mention a quote by the great indigenous elder and wise human being, Black Elk, who said it like this. He said, and I say, the sacred hoop of my people was one of the many hoops that made one circle, wide as daylight, and as starlight. And in the center grew one mighty flowering tree to shelter all the children of one mother and one father. And in the center, said Black Elk, and in the center grew one mighty flowering tree to shelter all the children of one mother and one father. So let's keep moving on with our theme of reimagining the magic of trees, of using trees as mentors, as allowing trees to teach us to be wise relatives on this planet Earth. Which brings us to another poem, which brings us to another tree too. Think like a tree. Now we're going to think like a tree. We're going to be like a tree, think like a tree, find the magic in trees. All this around trees by Karen Schrag, this particular poem called Think Like a Tree. First line goes like this. Soak up the sun, soak up the sun, affirm life's magic. Be graceful in the wind. Stand tall after a storm. Feel refreshed after it rains. Grow strong without notice. Be prepared for each season. Provide shelter to strangers. Hang tough through a cold spell. Emerge renewed at the first signs of spring. Stay deeply rooted while reaching for the sky. Be still long enough to hear your own leaves rustling. Those last lines are quite breathtaking to me. Hang tough through a cold spell. We all know about cold spells. Hang tough through a cold spell. Emerge renewed at the first signs of spring. Stay deeply, deeply rooted while reaching for the sky. Be still long enough to hear your own leaves rustling. I like to imagine that being still like that, to be able to hear our own leaves rustling, is like the idea, like the feeling, like the image of us finding our purpose in life. What what is the sound of our own leaves rustling? We have to be still and quiet to find and recognize that sound. Now, there is a quote by the great poet Rumi. I have several for you, actually. And he said it like this. He said, be like a tree, and let the dead leaves drop. Be like a tree, and let the dead leaves drop. Now, again, we're using the metaphor of leaves in a slightly different way, but just to emerge. The great poet Goethe once said, I praise what is truly alive, what longs to be burned to death. It's the same idea. It's the idea that we need to be able to step into each moment of our lives new and fresh, new and fresh. And my wife and I have a line that we say to each other, and we try to do it in a humorous spirit most of the time, and that is to say, you have to see me new and fresh every day. Which reminds me of that another saying. It says, I have known you so long, I have no idea who you are. Well, I think that is to say that we need to see each other. We need to see the trees, the natural world, the trees in particular in this episode today, fresh and new every day, to see the amazing being that a great oak tree is, or here on the West Coast, which I've spent my adult life on the West Coast, redwood trees, to be able to see the majesty of a redwood tree. Fresh, fresh. I've known you so long, I have no idea who you are. And that can happen with other people if we're not careful, if we don't pay careful attention. And it can certainly happen with the natural world. It can happen with trees, so that when we see them and allow us to be surprised, we can be. That's really the notion that we're talking about reimagining the magic of trees, is to see the trees just as we would see each other, just as we would see ourselves, by the way, in a fresh, new way. So, be like a tree, said Rumi, and let the dead leaves drop. Sometimes that's what we have to do to be able to see ourselves fresh, to be able to see others fresh, to be able to see the natural world fresh. Even our challenges, to be able to see fresh, to see the challenges in a fresh way, the predicaments that we are in a fresh way, so that we have new ways, new dance steps. Rumi also said, if the foot of the trees were not tied to earth, if the foot of the trees were not tied to earth, they would be pursuing me. For I have blossomed so much, I am the envy of the gardens. Rumi, so amazing. What, just the, just his sheer scope with what he wrote was so amazing. Amazing. By the way, I think Rumi is still the best-selling poet on the planet, all in. And it's pretty amazing since he's been gone about 1,000 years. One last Rumi quote while we're playing with think like a tree and being like trees. Here's what he said. He says, every tree and plant in the meadow seem to be dancing. Every tree and plant in the meadow seem to be dancing. Those with which average eyes would see, those which average eyes would see as fixed and still. See, that's what he's saying. If we're looking with old, tired eyes at the natural world, even the magic of the natural world, the magic of trees, that we would see them as just, a thing, just some kind of thing instead of an amazing creature. So let's keep cooking and let's go to one of my favorite poets. Many of you, I think, probably share that with me. It was Mary Oliver, who just left us on this plane, at least, not too many years ago. She just died. And yet, her poetry is alive and well. I was at a bookstore recently, and actually to see the amazing poet Billy Collins in person, which was thrilling. And I was there and looked over, and of course, there's as many Mary Oliver volumes on the shelf as I ever recall. And so she is living now through her poetry. She wrote a poem which is, I think, makes sense for today's episode called When I Am Among the Trees. Here's how Mary Oliver said it on this day when she wrote this poem. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locusts, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say they save me, and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself. Take that line in. I am so distant from the hope of myself. Let's stop there for just a second. Can you imagine getting up on some day when you're feeling less than stellar and just saying, I am so distant from the hope of myself? Maybe if we claimed it, if we claimed our sadness, like we were talking about in last week's episode, talking about if we can claim and own our sadness and that of others and help others claim and carry their sadness and they ours, that we have a much better chance to step into some kind of more persistent and sustainable joy. Well, this reminds me of that. This reminds me of that. I am so distant from the hope of myself. She goes on, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, stay a while, stay a while. The light flows from their branches and they call again. It's simple, they say. It's simple, they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light and to shine. And to shine. What a poem. I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, stay a while, stay a while. The light flows from their branches, and they call again. It's simple, they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. Mary Oliver. I was reminded as I was putting this episode together of a wonderful quote by the poet David Ignato. And he said it like this. He said, I wish I knew the beauty of leaves falling. To whom are we beautiful as we go? I wish I knew the beauty of leaves falling. To whom are we beautiful as we go? Now, Robert Bly also had something interesting to say about this whole subject of trees in a collection called Eating the Honey of Words, New and Selected Poems. Again, Robert Bly, another poet, another amazing poet who we just lost just a few years ago. He lived a long life into his middle 90s, as I recall. He said it like this: We did not come to remain whole. We did not come to remain whole. We came to lose our leaves like the trees, trees that start again, drawing up from the great roots. We did not come to remain whole. We came to lose our leaves like trees, trees that start again, drawing up from the great roots. That's what Robert Bly said, and I believe him when he says it. Okay, so that reminds me that I had a quote that I found that also among these quotes and poems that I wanted to share with you by Suzanne Simard, who is the amazing person and author who wrote Finding the Mother Tree, which, if you've not heard of that or if you've not read that book or seen it, I would recommend you do. Of course, I always recommend that you check out the poets that I feature on this podcast. So here's what Suzanne Simard said in Finding the Mother Tree. The byline for that book is Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest. Isn't that sort of our theme today? Discovering the wisdom and the magic. Maybe those two things go together quite well. Wisdom and magic, that is. Okay. She said it like this. She said, plants are attuned to one another's strengths and weaknesses, elegantly giving and taking to attain exquisite balance. There is grace in complexity, in actions cohering, in sum totals. There is grace in complexity, in actions cohering, in sum totals. Amazing research about how trees communicate with one another, how they give to one another, how they support each other. These great networks of trees and roots. So amazing. We can learn so much from the cooperation, the majesty, the magic, the wisdom of trees. Okay, so let us continue on our journey today with, I've got one last poem and then a quote, and we are headed for the barn today, as they say. This poem is by William Stafford. Of course, he's one of my all-time favorite mentor poets. This particular poem came from a collection he did called The Rescued Year, and it's called The Tulip Tree. Have you ever seen one of those tulip trees? They're just amazing. They almost look unreal. They're so gorgeous. And he's talking about one that he must have had in his on his property at Lake Oswego, just outside of Portland in Oregon. The tulip tree. Many a winter night, that's how the poem starts. Many a winter night, the green of the tulip tree lives again among other trees, returns through miles of rain to that level of color all day patterned white when wearied, calmly asserted in our yard. Only pale by the evergreen, hardly distinguished by leaf or color, it used to slide a little pale from other trees, and no great effect at our house. It sustained what really belonged. It sustained what really belonged, but would, if severely doubted, disappear. Many a winter night it arrives and says for a moment, I am still here. Many a winter night it arrives and says for a moment, I am still here. How many times in our lives when sorrow and sadness and even despair is coming at us, can we learn from the great tulip tree to simply stand and say, I am still here? You know, the poet Rilke, the great German poet Rilke, once talked about that sometimes the only thing we have to give is our great grief cry. Our great grief cry. Sometimes that's all we have to give. And sometimes that's all that is needed. And to say, I am still here. Now, I wanted to end with a little micro essay. It's actually very short. It's more like a quote, but I find it very poetic, by Ram Dass, who many of you know. Ram Dass, if you don't know him, I would say, sniff him out. He was an amazing teacher. And this little piece was called on self-judgment, on self-judgment. And he said it like this. I think right with our theme. Yeah. When you go out into the woods, when you go out into the woods and you look at trees, and I'd love it if you would do that. I would love it if you, are so inspired to go out into the woods as soon as you can after this podcast and look at some trees, really look at some trees, see them fresh, as we were saying. And, of course, all this that I'm saying to myself. Every one of these things, every one of these poems has reminded me, has helped me remember myself over and over again. Remember myself. So, Ram Dass, he said, when you go out into the woods and you look at trees, you see all these different trees, and some of them are bent, and some of them are straight, and some of them are evergreens, and some of them are whatever. And you look at the tree and you allow it. You just allow it. You appreciate it. You see why it is the way it is. You sort of understand that it didn't get enough light, and so it turned that way. And you don't get all emotional about it. You just allow it. You appreciate the tree. Now, the minute you get near humans, you lose all that. We lose all that. You lose all that. And you are constantly saying, you're to this, or I'm to this. That judging mind comes in. And so I practice turning people into trees. And so I practice, said Ram Dass, turning people into trees, which means appreciating them just the way they are. Mary Oliver once said, "Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination," announcing your place in the family of things. And when we see trees, as Ram Dass says, and we're out in the forest and we see them and we see one that, oh, all the leaves are kind of weird on one side of the tree and all of them are vibrant on the other. And it's sort of the tree, as he's talking about, moves toward the light. But, some of the limbs aren't quite beautiful because they have not had as much light. Or some trees are just totally vibrant and huge. Some redwoods I've seen are just magnificent. Muir Woods is not very far from where I'm speaking right now. And so you can go there and you can see those majestic redwoods right beside the tiniest little, I don't know, birch. And the birch is having a hard time, but both have magic. We can reimagine both. Both have majesty. Both have something to teach us on many, many things, particularly, as Ram Dass would say, on not being so self-judging. Not being so self-judging. Okay. We have come to the end of another episode. That is a wrap. And as I always say, if you have learned something or you've had a little tidbit of inspiration, then, pass this podcast on to somebody else that you think would enjoy it. Make a comment, all of that stuff. Totally appreciate it. And if you want to send me a note about something, of course, send that note. I am Dale at dalebyron.com. Easy to find. And I would just say that go to the forest as soon as you can. Go to your backyard. Go to some patch, a little park, some patch that has a tree or two on it, and find a tree that you can appreciate and look at. And maybe even you'll see some majesty in that tree, and that tree will reflect back your own dignity, your own majesty, your own worth and value as a partner on this planet, as a person, as a human being, as an animal, as a being on this planet. And you can be mentored, and maybe you'll even find yourself dancing around a tree. I may try that sometime soon. Okay, so as I always say, until next time and next poem, take good care of yourself. I appreciate your listening ear. Take good care of yourself.